CEO, regretted everything when his abandoned ex-wife took the stage with Triplets. And welcome to Alcott, stories the home of love, heartbreak, and powerful second chances. I'm so happy you're here. Today's story is going to take you on a journey of betrayal, redemption, and the kind of forgiveness that doesn't come easy but is worth everything. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I'd love to know how far this story is traveling tonight. Heapy, may this story touch your heart, stir your emotions, and remind you that healing is always possible even when the pain runs deep. Grab a drink, sit back, and let's begin. Zariah Monroe entered the glass-walled boardroom like a wave of quiet thunder, each step in her black stilettos echoing with purpose, elegance, and power. Her mocha skin gleamed under the natural light spilling through the skylight, and her navy blue blazer clung to her like tailored confidence. The room, full of stone-faced CEOsmen who'd grown numb to presentations, suddenly shifted in their seats, straightening ties, checking notes, and pretending not to stare. But none of them watched her the way Ethan Carter did. From the moment she stood by the projector screen, calm and composed, flipping her braided hair behind her shoulder as she set up her slides, Ethan felt something move in him, something unfamiliar, something unspoken. Zariah began to speak, and the air changed. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was compelling, smooth, clear, assured. Her diction was crisp, her pitch perfectly paced, her language free of filler and doubt. She didn't stumble or stutter. She didn't try to impress, simply knew her material, lived her pitch, owned her strategy. Her eyes flicked between the men with sharp professionalism, not flirtation, and every time her hands moved, pointing at the screen or clutching the wireless remote, there was a grace to her movements that made it impossible to look away. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, stunned not just by the brilliance she was sharing about product alignment and projected ROI, but by the way she made the sterile room feel like a stage built just for her. Her style, subtle gold hoops, sleek skirt, burgundy lipstick, was effortless yet bold. He watched the way her lips formed each word, the rise and fall of her confidence, the certainty behind every claim. It wasn't just a presentation. It was a performance of excellence. And somewhere between slide 6 and her closing statement about cross-brand scalability, Ethan Carter, the man who had turned down supermodels and business heiresses, felt himself falling not fast, not foolishly, but deeply. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, which was rare in their industry, and she bowed her head lightly, not in vanity, but in humble acknowledgement. She began collecting her tablet, notes, and pointer, while executives whispered praise to one another. Ethan rose slowly, as if waking from a dream. He didn't even glance at the other. She's eyes followed her every step as she exited with the same graceful command she had arrived with. Driven by instinct, not strategy, Ethan followed her out, adjusting his cufflinks and rehearsing his words in his mind, which was unusual for him. He never needed preparation to talk to anyone. But Zariah wasn't just anyone. He caught up with her near the elevators, where the soft ding of the closing doors snapped him into urgency. "Miss Monroe," he called gently, trying not to sound too eager. She turned, arching a brow with polite curiosity, but no hint of excitement. "Mr. Carter," she replied evenly, already aware of who he was. He praised her pitch, complimented her clarity, tried to extend the conversation, but her responses remained short, professional, and perfectly neutral. There was no flirtation, no curiosity, just poise. Her eyes were direct but distant, like someone who knew how dangerous interest from powerful men could be. "Thank you for your feedback," she said with a smile that felt more like a full stop than a comma. Then, with a soft nod, she stepped into the elevator and disappeared behind its silver doors, leaving Ethan standing in the corridor, with his confidence questioned for the first time in years. It wasn't rejection, it was dismissal wrapped in grace. It thrilled him more than it discouraged him. She hadn't fallen for his name, his face, or his empire, and that made her unforgettable. As he returned to the boardroom, he couldn't focus on the next agenda point. Zariah's presence lingered like a melody stuck in his mind, like a scent you can't quite name but crave. She was not just beautiful, she was brilliant, poised, and impossible to impress with money or status. That night, Ethan lay awake, thinking not about stocks or market projections, but about the woman who looked him in the eye, saw his charm, and walked away unfazed. And though he didn't know it yet, this was not the end but the moment that changed everything. It was nearly midnight when the sharp ring of Zariah's phone sliced through the quiet of her small apartment, jolting her from the few moments of rest she'd allowed herself after a long workday. The panicked voice on the other end was her neighbor, breathless and shaken, telling her that her mother had fallen tumbled down the stairs while trying to water the plants she refused to let die, even in old age. Zariah didn't wait for full details. She grabbed her keys, slipped on a hoodie over her tank top, and rushed out with no shoes on her feet, her heart slamming in her chest like it was trying to break free. The hospital emergency room was a blur of chaos, nurses rushing past, stretchers wheeled in, beeping machines, and the overwhelming smell of antiseptic. But Zariah saw only one thing: her mother's frail body, barely conscious, lying on a bed with her arm dangling lifelessly and a blood-soaked towel pressed against her head. "She's lost a lot of blood," the doctor said grimly, flipping through charts. "We need O negative urgently. We've tried the database, but it's rare. She won't make it without a transfusion in the next hour." Zariah's legs nearly gave out. She clung to the counter, frantically dialing every number she could think of, from colleagues to distant cousins, only to hear variations of the same painful, answer-wrong blood type: unavailable, unreachable. Her voice cracked as she begged the nurse to check again, her eyes wild with helplessness. In a moment of raw desperation, with her hands trembling and her mother's breathing growing shallow by the second, she made a call she never thought she would. She dialed her boss. Through choked sobs, she explained the situation, stammering between words, trying to remain composed but failing. Her boss, startled by her rare vulnerability, paused only for a second before saying, "Don't worry. I know someone. I'll make the call." Meanwhile, Ethan Carter was seated in his penthouse suite, overlooking the city, a glass of scotch in hand, scrolling absent-mindedly through a proposal when his phone rang. He almost ignored hated interruptions at night, but the name on the screen caught his attention. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "A woman you might remember needs your help. Her mother's in critical condition. They need O negative blood fast. I thought of you." Ethan didn't ask who. He already knew. And before his assistant could even finish the sentence, he was up, grabbing his jacket, abandoning everything without hesitation. At the hospital, the staff moved fast the moment he arrived. As he filled out the donor forms, Ethan's mind flashed back to Hertha, woman who had once looked at him like he didn't exist, the woman whose voice had haunted his nights ever since. And now, she needed him. Minutes later, he was hooked up, the cold needle piercing his skin, his blood flowing into tubes that would give life to the woman who raised her. Down the hall, Zariah sat on a bench, head in her hands, barely breathing. When the nurse whispered that a donor had arrived, she lifted her eyes, mascara smudged, cheeks stained with tears. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "He said you'd know him," the nurse replied gently. Curious and shaken, Zariah stood and followed the nurse, rounding the corner and stopped dead in her tracks. There, through the glass, was Ethan Carter's sleeves rolled up, 4 in his arm, head leaned back against the wall. He looked exhausted, but peaceful. Her breath caught, her emotions tangled into a knot so tight she couldn't speak. When he finished and came out, their eyes locked, and for a moment the sterile hospital faded. "You?" she whispered, disbelieving. "Why?" Ethan gave a tired, faint smile. "Because someone I admire was breaking down tonight, and I couldn't live with not trying." The words hit her harder than she expected. Her knees wobbled, and she turned her face away, ashamed of the way tears spilled again. She had always been strong, but tonight she was breaking, and he saw it. "Thank you," she said after a long pause, barely holding it together. "You didn't have to, but you did." Ethan stepped closer, not too close, but enough for her to feel his presence. "I'll always show up when it's you," he said quietly, almost to himself. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. That night, after her mother was stabilized and placed under observation, Zariah waited outside the hospital under the dim parking lot lights. Ethan walked out, his hands in his coat pockets, and saw her standing there, arms crossed, gaze distant. He walked up beside her, wordless for a moment. She finally turned. "You made me feel seen tonight. Not just help seen. I don't know why, but it matters." He smiled, slow and warm. "Because you've mattered to me since the moment you walked into that boardroom," he admitted. Zariah looked away, lips quivering. "I'm not used to men showing up without wanting something in return." Ethan's face grew serious. "Then let me be the exception." A soft wind brushed past them, and for the first time she didn't flinch when he stepped a little closer. She looked at him, not the millionaire, not the CEO, not the man with power, but just the man who sat for an hour to give blood to a woman he barely knew, just to make sure she didn't cry alone. Something in her heart began to melt, slowly, cautiously. She didn't say anything more that night, but when she said goodbye, it was softer than before. And Ethan Carter knew, in that quiet exit under flickering lights, something irreversible had begun to bloom between them. After that night beneath the flickering hospital lights, something unspoken passed between Ethan and Zariah. Something neither could name, but both could feel pulsing beneath their skin like a gentle current. Ethan didn't flood her with messages or overwhelm her with gestures. Instead, he chose presence over pressure. He started appearing in subtle places, sending flowers to her office desk, not with cheesy notes, but with quotes from Maya Angelou and James Baldwin, words that resonated with the soul she kept guarded. He requested meetings with her company just to hear her voice during calls, and whenever their schedules aligned, he'd invite her for a quiet coffee. Nothing more, just two people reconnecting over moments that felt simple yet electric. At first, Zariah remained measured, always arriving with professionalism stitched into her every breath, always holding back just enough to feel safe. But as the days unfolded, she began to see a version of Ethan that was vastly different from the sharp-edged tycoon she had imagined. He asked about her mother's recovery with genuine care, remembered her favorite tea without asking twice, and sent her links to documentaries on black entrepreneurship and stories of underrepresented women in business. It wasn't flattery, was understanding, and that mattered more than charm ever could. One evening, he texted her about a jazz night happening in a quiet downtown lounge, saying he thought of her when he saw the flyer. She debated going, but something within her wanted to see what it meant when a man pursued softly, with intention rather than conquest. She arrived wearing a simple cream blouse and jeans, but Ethan looked at her like she was art. That night, as Coltrane's saxophone danced through the dimly lit room, they sat inches apart, but miles deeper than they'd ever been. Their hands brushed once as they reached for the same menu, and neither pulled away. Zariah caught herself smiling at his jokes, her laughter lighter, unforced. She noticed how he didn't stare at her lips. When she spoke, watched her eyes, as if he was listening not to answer, but to understand. Their text conversations became longer, later, laced with inside jokes, and the kind of thoughtful questions that peeled back layers gently. He asked about her dreams, not just her job. She asked about his childhood, not just his empire. Once, she mentioned her father who left when she was 5, and Ethan didn't rush to pity or advice, just stayed silent long enough for her to feel heard. Another time, she told him she felt like her brown skin made her invisible in rooms filled with power, and he replied, "It doesn't make you invisible to mate, makes you unforgettable." That line replayed in her mind for days. With each passing moment, she stopped looking for red flags and started noticing green She's patience, his depth, the way he walked on the outside of the sidewalk when they strolled, the way he held the door like it was a natural reflex, not a show. One late afternoon, after a long meeting, he brought her her favorite hazelnut latte and left it on her desk with a sticky note, "For the woman who makes spreadsheets sound like symphonies." She laughed so hard she cried, and in that tiny crack of laughter, another wall came down. Soon, their accidental touches became intentional, his hand gently grazing her lower back when guiding her through a doorway, her fingers lingering on his wrist when passing him a file. They weren't a couple yet, but there was an intimacy forming, built not on grand gestures, but on moments that mattered. One night, as they sat beneath a street lamp outside her building, silence stretched between them like silk. She turned to him and said, "You confuse me. I thought I knew men like you." Ethan looked at her, that stormy blue gaze steady. "Maybe I confuse you because I'm trying to know you, not own you." She felt her heart skip, and for the first time she didn't look away. On another evening, he walked her to her car in the rain, both of them laughing as they dodged puddles. She slipped slightly, and he caught her waist with such instinctive care it made her freeze. Their eyes met in the drizzle, and for a second, it felt like the world blurred around them. She stepped back before anything could happen, but the way she looked at him afterwards, after curious, wondering, said everything. He never pushed for more, never asked for labels, and that restraint made her feel safe, desired, and respected all at once. He was peeling her heart open, one respectful moment at a time. She found herself saving his messages, rereading them before bed, smiling at her phone like a teenager, and feeling things she'd locked away for years. Her mother even noticed it. "You laugh more now," she said one morning. "Who's the man behind that smile?" Zariah didn't answer, but her eyes said it all. The shift was slow, deliberate, and undeniable. He was no longer just the CEO who sat in the boardroom. He had become the man who saw past her silence, who heard the tremble beneath her strength, who waited at her emotional gate without banging. And she was no longer the cautious secretary guarding her heart. She was becoming the woman daring to believe that someone could love her fully, boldly, and without asking her to change. Whatever this was between them, it wasn't a spark, it was a slow-burning fire, the kind that couldn't be put out easily. They were closer, now not in title, not in name, but in truth, in rhythm, in soul. The city outside glimmered like a sea of gold beneath the velvet night, but inside the penthouse suite on the top floor of the Avalon Hotel, time slowed to something softer, quieter, more sacred. Zariah stepped into the candlelit room, her white silk robe flowing gently around her, the neckline resting delicately against her collarbone as if it had been stitched to mirror her grace. Her skin shimmered like bronze kissed by moonlight, her hair pulled back in a loose twist that revealed the delicate curve of her neck. Across the room, Ethan stood by the window in a crisp white shirt, no tie, top buttons undone, his expression unreadable but his eyes full of something raw. They didn't rush toward each other. They didn't fumble or flirt. Instead, they stood in the stillness, absorbing the weight of what this night meant. Two hearts who had known distance now choosing closeness without fear. He walked toward her slowly, his hand brushing the edge of the table where a few candles flickered against crystal glasses and untouched wine. Zariah sat on the edge of the chaise lounge, not seductively, but thoughtfully, tucking one leg beneath her, her fingers nervously twirling the corner of her sleeve. "I didn't come here for promises," she said softly. "Only truth." Ethan nodded and knelt before her, not like a plea, but like a man grounding himself. "Then let's speak it," he said, voice low and honest. What followed wasn't moans or breathless gasps, but something deeper. They talked, really talked. Zariah told him about the time she gave her heart to a man who only loved her ambition until it outshined his. She spoke of nights she cried herself to sleep in college because she felt unseen, unheard, undesired in a world that praised whiteness and punished her beauty by omission. Ethan didn't interrupt. He listened with the reverence of a man being handed a sacred story. Then he shared his truth show. Success became a shield after his mother died. How every woman he'd dated had wanted the brand, not the man. He told her how he sometimes hated the way money silenced real emotion and how, for years, he didn't know if he was capable of giving real love. She didn't reach for his hand, but he reached for hers quietly, as if asking permission to hold what was hurting. Their fingers interlocked like puzzle pieces that had waited years to find their match. There was no urgency in the way he leaned forward, only wonder. His lips touched hers with the gentleness of a man memorizing, not taking. It wasn't lust, it was communion. She melted into him slowly, her body responding not to his touch alone but to the safety in it. When they moved to the bed, it wasn't for performance, it was for presence. She slid beneath the covers, heart pounding not from fear but from a strange, unspoken relief. He lay beside her, his hand resting against her cheek, thumb stroking her skin like she was poetry. They kissed again, longer this time, their breathing sinking like waves. Clothes slipped away, not like armor falling, but like burdens lifted. The way he looked at her made her chest ache like she was the only woman he had ever truly seen. Their bodies met in rhythm, not desperation. He whispered her name like a vow, and she clung to him like she had been waiting for this shelter her whole life. There were no games, no expectations, just the echo of shared pain and the beauty of shared healing. Afterward, they didn't move. They just lay there, his chest rising and falling beneath her cheek, her fingers drawing invisible patterns along his ribs. "Are you scared?" she asked in a whisper. He nodded, terrified of how much this already means. She closed her eyes and let herself believe, for the first time in years, that maybe this could be different. Not perfect, but real. He told her she was the first woman who made him want to become softer, not harder. She told him he made her feel not just beautiful but worthy. The room stayed quiet, except for the hum of the city beyond the windows, and the gentle rustle of sheets when he pulled her closer, draping an arm around her waist like a silent promise. They drifted into sleep, not as strangers wrapped in momentary passion, but as two souls who had found a place to rest in each other. It was a night not defined by what happened between their bodies, but by what was finally allowed to happen within their hearts. Morning light spilled through the hotel windows, golden and warm, illuminating their still intertwined bodies as Zariah stirred beneath Ethan's steady breath. That morning held something secret, a silence too soft to break, a peace that felt earned. Days passed in a dreamy blur after that night, with each moment tethering them closer, like invisible threads sewing two wounded hearts into one shared rhythm. Ethan surprised her one evening with a question, whispered against her temple as they sat watching the rain dance on her apartment window. "Will you be Millionaire just now, but always?" No speech, no spectacle, just sincerity in its purest form. Zariah, stunned but moved, whispered yes, and the world felt quiet and safe in that moment. The wedding was small, intimate, almost secret. Held beneath the soft shadows of a blooming garden just outside the city, it was attended only by a handful of witnesses, her mother, his longtime driver, and a soft-spoken officiant, who spoke of commitment like it was both fire and shelter. Zariah wore a cream dress that hugged her frame with elegance and grace, her braids pinned in a halo around her head. Ethan wore a grey tailored suit, clean and classic, yet he couldn't stop his eyes from welling up when he saw her walking toward him, bouquet trembling in her hands. Her mother placed a kiss on her forehead and whispered, "You deserve happiness, baby," before stepping aside. The vows were brief, but every word sank like stone into their souls. Zariah looked at him and saw not just the man she loved, but the man she was willing to trust, despite all the fears that lived in the corners of her heart. Ethan held her hands like they were the only anchor left in the world, promising her forever in a voice steady enough to make her believe it. And for a while, forever felt real. Their first few weeks as husband and wife felt like something borrowed from a dream. Slow mornings wrapped in sheets, breakfasts made together, kisses exchanged in between meetings, laughter over burnt toast and late-night television. Zariah would watch him walk around the apartment, sleeves rolled, hair slightly tousled, and think to herself, "Maybe I finally got to be the lucky one." She would call her mother after dinner and gush about how his hand always found hers under the table, how he still said, "You're beautiful," even when she wore pajamas and no makeup. But slowly, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. Ethan began coming home later than usual, offering vague explanations, business dinners, investor calls, meetings that ran over. Zariah didn't question him at first. She believed in space, in trust. But the air around him changed, subtle at first, like the way he stopped asking how her day went, or how he began scrolling through his phone while she spoke. The kisses became shorter, less certain, and some nights absent altogether. She would wait up for him with warm food that turned cold, her face pressed against the window like a forgotten portrait, her eyes scanning the streetlights in vain. When he walked in at midnight with apologies too tired to sound sincere, she'd smile anyway, trying to be understanding, trying not to fall apart. But it was hard not to notice the emotional gaps widening. He stopped holding her in bed, and when she tried to talk about work, about life, about themes, replies felt clipped, distant, empty. Her presence in the room began to feel like background noise rather than the melody they once danced to. Zariah started questioning herself silently. Did she say something wrong? Was she not enough? She began counting his silences, trying to translate what he wouldn't say into something she could fix. Her heart grew heavier with each unanswered question, each moment of avoidance, each time he looked past her like she was furniture, instead of the woman he had promised forever to. One night, she stood by the door waiting, her white nightgown flowing softly around her, makeup smudged from trying to stay awake with hope. When he finally walked in, smelling of cologne she didn't recognize. She didn't ask where he'd been. She just looked at him, searching his eyes for something, anything. But he brushed past her, mumbled something about needing sleep, and disappeared into the darkened hallway. She curled into herself on the couch, hands trembling, tears slipping silently down her face. The ache in her chest felt like betrayal, but without proof, without confrontation. It was the kind of pain that begged to be denied, but wouldn't let her breathe. She began second-guessing her worth, wondering if love had tricked her into hope again. She still set the table for two every night, still left a note in his briefcase, still waited for his warmth to return. But his distance was deliberate, calculated, as if erasing her slowly was easier than breaking her all at once. And yet, every night, Zariah would climb into bed beside him, her back turned, her hands folded over her chest like a silent prayer for love to come back home. But the man beside her slept like nothing was missing, and that, more than anything, broke her. Zariah lay curled on the edge of the bed that no longer felt like home, her back to the man who once whispered promises into her skin, her breath shallow, eyes wide open in the darkness that had become familiar. Every night blurred into silence, every morning a routine of pretending. The warmth between them had long faded, replaced with cold avoidance and the sharp sting of indifference. She had reached out so many times through meals, questions, soft glances, but each effort felt like pouring her love into a cracked glass, leaking out faster than she could refill it. Then came the day that would carve itself into her memory forever. The sun outside was bright, mocking the storm brewing inside the apartment. Ethan stood by the kitchen counter, scrolling through emails, barely acknowledging her presence as she approached with hesitant steps, still trying to fix what felt irreparable. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small but steady, tired of dancing around the growing wall between them. He didn't look up. "We've talked enough," he said. Something in his tone made her chest tighten. She waited, hoping he would elaborate, hoping there was still a thread left to pull. And then he dropped the words like daggers across porcelain. "I married you on impulse." Her body stilled. "What?" she whispered, thinking surely she misheard him. He turned to face her now, finally looking at her, but not with love, not even anger, just a cold finality that froze the air. "I love white women, Zariah. That's what I've always preferred. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I was chasing a fantasy. Maybe I just wanted something different. But this," he gestured vaguely at the space between them, "this was a mistake." Her legs gave out beneath her, collapsing to the floor like her world just cracked open beneath her feet. Her breath came in choked gasps, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her chest, as if trying to keep her heart from falling out. "You said you loved me?" she croaked, her voice shattering like glass, eyes wide with disbelief. "You said I was the one." But Ethan had already turned away, picking up a manila envelope from the side table, sliding it toward her without emotion. "I've had the divorce papers ready for a week. I didn't want to drag this out. Just sign them." The sight of her name typed out in sterile black ink beside the word termination made her stomach twist. "You used me," she whispered, tears racing down her cheeks unchecked. "You broke me." He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply straightened his cufflinks and walked toward the door. Zariah crawled across the floor, grabbing at the hem of his coat, not to beg but to understand. "Was it all a lie?" she sobbed. He didn't answer. He didn't even flinch. He just peeled her hand off his sleeve like she was an inconvenience, and then he walked away, never once looking back. The door closed behind him with the thud of finality. Zariah stayed on the cold marble floor, her body racked with sobs that shook the walls. Her cries weren't just for the love that died, but for the way it died. Ripped from her by the man who once held her like she was fragile gold. She screamed into the silence, clutching her chest, her breath catching on broken memories. And then, as the hours passed and the city outside moved on as if nothing had happened, Zariah curled into herself, hands pressed against her belly, where something new had begun to grow beknownst to the man who abandoned her. Her tears mixed with the early waves of nausea she had been brushing off for days. Her palms rested against the tiny life blooming inside her, and her mind spun in 1,000 directions. She hadn't told him, he hadn't asked, and now he was gone. She was alone, utterly, devastatingly alone. But within that desolation, something fierce sparked in her soul. Not anger, not revenge, but survival. Her child would not grow up begging for love. Her child would know strength not because she had it now, but because she would fight to find it. She stared at the divorce papers lying crumpled beside her and whispered through cracked lips, "You may have broken me, Ethan Carter, but I will rise." With the ink of betrayal still wet on her soul and divorce papers lying crumpled like a broken vow, Zariah knew staying would mean slow death, a daily reminder of the man who stripped her of love and left her hollow. So one cold morning, while the city yawned and blinked into another ordinary day, she packed a single suitcase with trembling hands, her heart still aching, but her resolve sharper than ever. She didn't leave a note. She didn't tell a soul. She just vanished, slipping away from the skyline that held too many memories, too many ghosts, too many what-ifs. No one saw her board the early train heading out of the city, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big and sunglasses that hid swollen eyes. Her name was erased from building directories, her number disconnected, her social media wiped clean. She became a shadow, slipping into a quiet town miles away, where no one knew her name, her story, or the chaos growing quietly inside her. She found a small room in a rundown building where the heat worked only half the time, and the neighbors didn't ask questions. Days turned into weeks, and Zariah's body changed. She watched her belly rise in the dim light of her new world, rubbing it with tears she never let fall during the day. Nights were the hardest when the silence reminded her of what she lost, and the little flutters inside her made her remember what she still had. She worked wherever she could, cleaning offices at dawn, waiting tables in the evenings, and doing freelance admin work in between. She moved like a machine, powered by exhaustion and purpose, hiding her growing stomach beneath oversized uniforms and quiet determination. She didn't complain. She didn't crumble. She endured. Because inside her, 3 lives were forming, 3 hearts that beat louder than her pain, 3 lights that would someday call her Mommy. The labor came in a storm, wild and unrelenting, just like the love that followed it. In a small public hospital room with flickering ceiling lights and the faint smell of bleach, Zariah gave birth to her future 3 beautiful babies, with skin kissed in gold and eyes the color of ocean lightning. She held each of them against her chest, one after the other, and wept not because she was afraid, but because they were perfect. Each child bore a piece of the man who never looked back, Ethan's piercing blue eyes, the familiar dimple that once made her smile, the soft curls that framed their tiny faces. And yet, these children weren't reminders of what broke her. They were the reason she survived it. She named them after strength, grace, and light: Micah, Elias, and Nova. In their cries, she heard the echo of her own voice rising. In their warmth, she found healing. Every day, She raised them with a fierce, quiet devotion, feeding, bathing, nurturing, singing lullabies, even when her body ached and her feet throbbed. She stitched together moments of peace with second-hand toys and thrift store books, turning her tiny one-bedroom apartment into a sanctuary of love. Each smile they gave her felt like a victory against everything she'd lost. And yet, every time she looked into their eyes, she saw him. Ethan, the man who once held her like she was sacred, the man who discarded her like she was a regret, the father who would never know he had triplets who carried his laugh, his stare, his stubbornness. Zariah kept pictures of them tucked into her worn journal, snapshots of their first tooth, first steps, first words. She never said his name aloud in front of them, but on quiet nights, when the world outside slowed and her babies slept with curled fists and gentle breaths, she would trace the outline of their faces with her fingers and whisper promises. You will never feel abandoned. You will never question your worth. She didn't need revenge. She needed resilience. And every bottle she warmed, every lullaby she hummed, every scraped knee she kissed was a rebellion against the pain Ethan left behind. People in the town began to notice her strength. The young mother with 3 toddlers, always tired but always smiling, always holding her head high. She turned small jobs into steady income, saved every penny, skipped meals to pay for preschool, and taught her children about kindness, even when the world had shown her none. Her story didn't need pity. It needed purpose, and in every heartbeat of her triplets, she found it. Though Zariah had disappeared from the world that once tried to erase her, she had discovered something far more powerful than visibility. She found herself. Not the woman broken by divorce or the girl dismissed for her skin, but the mother reborn in fire. And while Ethan Carter continued his life unaware of the 3 souls who bore his name in their DNA, Zariah raised her children not with bitterness but with hope, because she knew that one day fate would bring the truth to his doorstep. And when it did, she would be ready not as the woman he left behind, but as the woman who rose far beyond him. While the rest of the world kept moving, Zariah Monroe moved differently, quieter, harder, with the kind of drive born only in women who have been burned and choose to rise from the ashes anyway. Her tiny apartment, once just a shelter from heartbreak, became the birthplace of something extraordinary. It started with scribbled ideas on napkins during midnight feedings, code written between diaper changes, and long hours spent watching tech tutorials while her triplets napped in shifts. With her laptop on the kitchen counter and formula bottles beside it, Zariah taught herself programming, UX design, and digital strategy. What began as a side hustle to make ends meet quickly sparked into something bigger, a tech platform that helped small Black-owned businesses streamline operations, connect with clients, and scale without massive capital. She named it Thrive Link because she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something meant to help others rise too. She pitched her ideas at local startup events, often with a baby strapped to her chest and 2 toddlers sitting quietly with snacks in the back row. Most people underestimated her until she opened her mouth. Her brilliance was undeniable. Her vision was sharp, her voice confident, her numbers solid. Slowly, the small checks started coming in, micro-investments from underrepresented angel investors who saw what others were too blind to recognize. A game changer in the making. Zariah didn't hire fancy teams. She couldn't afford them. She did customer support herself, built her first website at 3 a.m. using free software, and reinvested every dollar back into growth. She worked while her baby slept and barely slept herself. Some days she cried from exhaustion, but not once did she quit. Each rejection email made her more determined, not defeated. Each success, however small, was celebrated with a pizza night and group hugs on the worn-down couch she bought from a thrift store. Word spread. ThriveLink wasn't just functional, it was revolutionary. It filled a gap that Silicon Valley ignored. Soon, Zariah was invited to sit on panels, to mentor other women, to speak at diversity in tech conferences. She showed up in heels and braids, unapologetic about her identity, her story, her skin. People tried to rewrite her narrative as a feel-good comeback, but she made it clear this wasn't a comeback. She was never given a proper start to begin with. She was building from scratch, from grit, from grace. Her triplets, no wide-eyed 5-year-olds, became her biggest motivation and loudest cheerleaders. They called her Boss Mommy and danced whenever she closed a new funding round. Her office moved from the corner of the apartment to a rented co-working space, and then to a full downtown floor with glass walls and a skyline view. Investors came running, and this time she didn't chase shows. She sat at tables once gate-kept by suits and ties, her presence both disarming and commanding. She turned down offers that didn't align with her ethics and demanded equity for the communities that built her. Her intelligence shone through in every pitch, every panel, every decision. Magazines called her a disruptor. Blogs labeled her the tech Cinderella. But Zariah knew there was no fairy godmother, just blood, sweat, sleepless nights, and a fire that betrayal had lit but love for her children kept burning. When Forbes named her the youngest black billionaire in the city, she didn't cry for joy. She stood still, letting the moment settle into her bones. She thought of the cold hospital hallway, the divorce papers, the apartment floor where she collapsed when Ethan said she was a mistake. And then she smiled, not because of the wealth, but because she had rewritten the ending of a story that was meant to break her. She had become the storm and the shelter. The woman who was once left behind had now built an empire from the ruins. She wore her scars like jewels, her pain like armor, and her love like light. The world, which once ignored her, now couldn't stop watching. But the one face she had not yet seen in all this newfound fame was his Ethan Carter. And that, in some quiet part of her, still mattered. Not because she wanted him back, but because she wanted him to see what he walked away from, to see the woman he once held, now holding power he could never steal. She stood before the mirror in her penthouse bathroom, her figure wrapped in a tailored crimson suit, her natural beauty radiant beneath soft makeup. Her phone buzzed with congratulations. Her children's laughter echoed down the hall. And somewhere in the city, invitations were being sent to every CEO, every investor, every empire builder, inviting them to the launch of Monroe Global, the rebranded, multinational powerhouse born from the mind of the woman who once had nothing but heart. The invitation didn't bear her name, just the logo, just the date, just the address, because this time the reveal wouldn't come in a whisper. It would come from a stage, under lights, with her triplets standing beside her, and the man who once crushed her would be sitting in the front row, not knowing he was about to face the truth he buried, and the family he never knew he had. The countdown had begun. In the heart of the city, where glass towers shimmered like ambition carved in steel, Zariah Monroe stood before a sleek black envelope embossed with golden letters, the final detail of a plan 5 years in the making. No signature, no personal greeting. Just the logo of Monroe Global pressed onto the thick card like a royal seal, bold and intentional. It was an invitation not to a party, but to a reckoning. Across the city, those envelopes found their way into the hands of the elite. CEOs, moguls, investors, innovators, all of them curious about the mysterious new empire that seemed to rise overnight with power too clean to ignore. Among them, the invitation arrived at the office of Ethan Carter. It was placed casually on his desk by an assistant who mumbled something about $1 billion launch. Ethan barely looked up from his screen, his fingers tapping distractedly on the edge of his coffee mug. When he finally opened the envelope, the invitation inside was elegant black and gold, sharp corners, minimalistic font, the kind of design that whispered wealth without screaming it. You are cordially invited to the grand opening gala of Monroe Global. He frowned. Monroe Global. The name stirred something vague and familiar, but not enough to shake him. No mention of who founded it, no photo, no clue. Just the date, the venue-in exclusive rooftop garden atop the tallest building downtown, and a quiet undertone of prestige that made him raise an eyebrow. He leaned back in his chair, curiosity creeping in. "Clara," he called out to his wife as she entered the office in a silk blouse and pearl earrings, sipping her matcha latte. "Want to go to a billionaire's gala next weekend? Big company, Monroe Global sounds like a good networking opportunity. Clara raised an eyebrow. Interest piqued. Do we know them? He shrugged. Not personally. Probably some tech upstart. But it's being talked about. Might be smart to show face. Neither of them noticed the small tremor in his hand as he placed the invite on the coffee table. Somewhere deep inside, his subconscious stirred uneasy. Searching, but his ego quickly silenced it. After all, billionaires didn't come from nowhere, right? Meanwhile, across town, Zariah watched the guest list confirmations pour in from her executive assistant's tablet. Her expression remained unreadable, but her fingers curled slightly when she saw one name appear. Ethan Carter, +1. Her eyes didn't flinch, but her heart whispered, he's coming. Not because of her. Of course he had no idea. And that was the point. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reflection. She didn't need his apology. She needed him to see. See what he'd left behind. See what had risen without his name or help or love. The days leading up to the gala moved quickly. Designers delivered gowns. Her children rehearsed the small walk they'd take beside her on stage. PR teams finalized the run of the show, lighting cues and security detail. But through it all, Zariah remained composed. She'd lived through nights darker than any spotlight could expose. On the eve of the event, she stood before her 3 children, Micah, Elias, and Nova, helping them into custom suits and a tiny sparkling dress. Tomorrow, she whispered, brushing curls from Nova's face, we walk not just for Mommy but for every woman who was ever told she wasn't enough. The children didn't fully understand yet, but they nodded with wide, trusting eyes. And on the night of the gala, the rooftop garden sparkled like a dream sculpted in gold. Cascading lights draped across marble floors. Violinists played soft jazz beneath moonlight, and champagne flowed like quiet applause. Guests arrived in waves, powerful men in tuxedos, powerful women in gowns, all speculating about the mystery founder. And then Ethan Carter arrived, Clara on his arm, dressed in ivory silk and smiling like the world belonged to her. Ethan glanced around, eyes narrowed. The place was stunning, far more extravagant than he expected. Whoever this Monroe is, he muttered, they've got taste. Clara linked her arm with his, unaware of the storm quietly forming around them. Ethan didn't know it yet, but he was standing on the edge of a past he thought he'd buried. Every detail of the evening, from the logo glowing on the digital screens to the subtle perfume laced through the air, had been curated by the very woman he once called a mistake. But tonight, she wouldn't be a whisper in a shadow. She would be the light at the center of it all. And when the time came for the founder to step on stage, the world would pause. His world would unravel. Because Zariah Monroe wasn't just another name anymore. She was the moment. She was the empire. And she was about to reintroduce herself, not with bitterness, but with power dressed in elegance. The ballroom pulsed with anticipation, the air thick with champagne bubbles, murmured conversations, and curious speculation. Powerful men and women from every corner of industry gathered beneath the starlit canopy of the rooftop, sipping golden liquor and whispering about the mystery billionaire who built Monroe Global without a single public appearance. The massive LED screen behind the stage glowed softly with the company's emblem, a phoenix, wrapped in circuitry, fire reborn in innovation. Clara leaned in toward Ethan, her voice smooth and sweet. Do you think it's one of those Silicon Valley geniuses? Ethan shrugged, eyes scanning the stage, unaware that the world he carefully built was about to split open. Then the lights dimmed. Conversations halted. The spotlight found center stage. A voice over the speakers boomed with polished grace. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we welcome the visionary behind Monroe Global, youngest tech billionaire in the city, your host for the evening, Miss Zariah Monroe. The name hit Ethan like a silent thunderclap, unfamiliar and yet strangely intimate. Clara clapped politely. But Ethan? Ethan froze, and then she appeared. Zariah emerged from the shadows in a floor-length crimson gown that shimmered like fire under the lights, hugging every curve with elegance and power. Her braids were swept up in a crown of confidence, her skin glowing like bronze kissed by the moon, her posture regal and unshaken. A collective gasp swept the room like wind through leaves. Whispers broke out across the ballroom. "Is that? She's stunning. Wait, isn't that?" But Ethan didn't hear a word. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble as time stood still. His chest tightened, his throat dried. His legs turned to lead beneath him. He recognized her immediately, his ex-wife. The woman he discarded, the woman he broke. But this was not the same woman he walked away from. This was a queen, carved by pain and polished by power. She stood beneath the lights, fearless and breathtaking, the embodiment of everything he failed to see. And just when he thought his heart couldn't drop further, it did. From behind her, 3 children stepped onto the Steghetwo boys in tailored suits, one little girl in a sparkly red dress, all 3 standing proudly at her sides. The crowd reacted in awe at the adorable trio. But Ethan's world crumbled, because there was no mistaking it. The blue eyes, the deep-set dimples, the shape of their jaws, his own features, multiplied by 3, staring back at him from innocent faces he had never seen before. His stomach twisted. His heart kicked violently in his chest. Clara turned to him, confused. "Ethan, are you okay?" But he couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. The truth rushed in like a flood. He had children, 3 of them, triplets, and they were here, on stage, standing beside the woman he left without a backward glance. Zariah's eyes scanned the crowd calmly, and for a second landed on him. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just offered a soft, knowing smile before turning her attention back to the audience. "5 years ago," she began, her voice clear and commanding, "I lost everything I thought I needed and found everything I truly was." Her children stood tall, unaware of the storm brewing in the heart of the man who once dismissed their mother. "These 3 lights," she said, gesturing gently to them, "are not just my children. They are my strength, my clarity, my purpose." The audience erupted in applause, moved by her story, inspired by her grace. But Ethan couldn't hear it. All he could hear was the echo of his own cruelty bouncing off the marble walls of memory. He saw flashes of Zariah on the floor, begging him to see her. He saw the cold signatures on the divorce papers. He remembered the words "I love white women" that now tasted like poison on his tongue. His breath came in shallow, shaky gasps. Clara gripped his arm, now visibly concerned. "Ethan, what is going on?" she whispered, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight of 5 years collapsed on him, in an instant. Regret carved through him like glass. On that stage stood the family he never met, the legacy he abandoned, and for the first time in his life, Ethan Carterth, man who thought he had it all, realized he had nothing at all. Ethan stood frozen, the applause around him fading into a hollow hum, his vision tunneling as the truth bled through every layer of his carefully curated life. His $1 million suit clung to his skin like a noose, the air in the ballroom thick and suffocating. His knees threatened to buckle beneath the weight of realization, and before the next speaker took the mic, he muttered something unintelligible to Clara and stumbled through the maze of guests, eyes burning, breath sharp. Clara called after him, her voice confused and laced with panic, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He needed to breathe, to think, to find her. Backstage was quieter, dimmer, as if the world had narrowed into one singular pursuer, Zariah, the woman he had discarded like a wrong choice, now glowing in strength he never thought she'd possess. His footsteps echoed as he turned a corner and saw her standing alone, removing her microphone, speaking softly to one of the event staff. She looked calm, powerful, poised yet still. Zariah, the woman he once kissed under soft light, the one who held his heart before he shattered hers. "Zariah," he breathed, but it came out broken, cracked in the middle like his pride. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable, her body still except for the rise and fall of her breath. For a moment, they just stared at each other, him trembling, her steady. And then, as if his legs gave way beneath the guilt, Ethan dropped to his knees before her, hands clenched in desperation, face contorted by regret. "Please," he choked out, his voice unrecognizable even to himself. "Zariah, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I was blind. I was stupid. I let the world tell me who I should love. I let ignorance poison my heart." His tears fell freely now, trailing down his cheeks as he looked up at her like a man drowning, searching for breath. "I didn't just lose you, I lost everything. And I see it now. I see it all so clearly. Those kids, they're mine, aren't they? I saw them. I saw me in them, and two wasn't there. For the first step, the first words, the birthdays." He bent forward, shame radiating from every inch of his frame. "Please, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways I'll never fully understand. But I would give everything I have, every cent, every deal, every ounce of pride just to go back. Just to hold them, just to hold you." Zariah didn't move. Her face was still unreadable, but her silence spoke louder than any scream. Ethan's sobs shook him now, raw and without dignity. "I married someone else trying to prove something to myself. But it was you. It was always you. I loved you, Zariah. But I was too much of a coward to fight for you, to admit that the color of your skin never mattered. That the way you loved me, no one else ever did. Or could." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back, and that small gesture sliced him deeper than any blade. She looked down at him not with vengeance, but with the strength of a woman who had died and been reborn. "Do you remember the day you told me I was a mistake?" she asked softly. He nodded, the memory choking him. "I remember," he whispered, "every day." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I begged you to see me, to love me, to choose me, and you looked me in the eye and said I wasn't enough." He bowed his head in shame. "And yet," she continued, her voice a whisper of steel, "I carried your children. I raised them alone. I built a life from the ruins you left behind. I didn't just survive, Ethan. I thrived. Without your name, without your money, without your love." He looked up, pain stretching across his face like a cracked mirror. "But now I see," she said gently, "that maybe you were the one who wasn't enough for me." That sentence didn't come from bitterness. It came from truth, and that truth wrecked him. He fell back on his heels, his mouth trembling. "Please, let me try. Let me earn a place in their lives, in yours. Let me fix what I destroyed." Zariah looked down at him, the father of her children, the man she once trusted with her heart. She saw the sincerity, the devastation, the crumbling of a man who had finally realized the cost of his cruelty. But she also remembered the nights she cried alone, the bills unpaid, the birthdays celebrated with 1 cupcake and 3 candles. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know if there's a way back for us. But those children, they deserve to know where they come from. And you, if you want to be in their lives, you start there. Not with me, with them." Ethan nodded quickly, as if he'd take even a sliver of a second chance and build a kingdom from it. "Anything, everything. I'll prove it, Zariah." Her voice softened, but her strength remained. "Don't prove it to me, prove it to them." And with that, she turned away, leaving him on his knees broken, weeping, and finally awake. Zariah didn't move as she heard Ethan's broken promise echo in the hallway behind her, his voice cracked with desperation, his words trembling beneath years of regret, but she didn't turn back. Not yet. She'd waited too long, swallowed too much, buried too many screams just to make someone else comfortable. Now it was her turn to speak, not with softness, not with tears, but with the voice she'd found in the fires he lit and left her to burn in. She stopped halfway down the corridor, still facing away, her red gown trailing behind her like a flame refusing to die. Slowly, she turned, her eyes calm but fierce, and met him again, not as the woman who once begged for his affection, but as the mother, warrior, and empire builder who had carried his children and her own broken heart through storms he never stayed for. "You want to fix this?" she said, her voice low but cutting. "You want forgiveness?" Ethan nodded rapidly, his breath shallow. "Then hear me," she said, stepping forward, each heel clicking like a heartbeat carved in stone. "You threw me away because of my skin, because I didn't fit into the mold of your perfect, polished, whitewashed world. You looked me in the face, the same face you said you loved, and told me I was a mistake. She didn't blink. You told me you loved white women. So go love her. Don't come crawling back now that the woman you rejected glows so bright you can't ignore it. Ethan's eyes filled again, his mouth opening, but she lifted her hand, silencing him with nothing but presence. Do you know what it feels like, she continued, to carry life inside you while feeling like death is pressing down on your chest? Do you know what it's like to scream into a pillow because you don't want your neighbors to hear you breaking at 2 a.m.? I do. I remember lying on that cold apartment floor, stomach cramping, alone and terrified, while your name danced through my mind like a curse I couldn't stop repeating. Ethan's face twisted in pain, but she didn't soften. I gave birth to your children, Ethan. 3 of them. Alone. I held them in my arms and whispered your namanut with love, but with resentment, with confusion, with disbelief that the man who once made me feel like I mattered could vanish like I was disposable. I taught them to walk. I watched them fall and wiped every tear. I sacrificed everything I had, skipped meals, skipped sleep, skipped dreams just to make sure they had enough. Her voice cracked for the first time, but her eyes never wavered. And you were off living the life you thought you wanted, with someone who matched your skin, your circle, your image. But let me tell you something, Ethan, she may have matched your world, but I held your legacy in my womb. The weight of those words hung thick in the air. Ethan dropped to his knees again, chest heaving, eyes wide with unbearable guilt. I was a coward, he rasped, tears pouring without restraint. I was so weak, Zariah. I let the world tell me what love should look like instead of listening to my own heart. But I never stopped loving you, not even for a second. Zariah's lip trembled, but she pressed it firm. You don't get to romanticize it now. Love doesn't abandon. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't say I was a mistake. He crawled toward her, voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. You were never a mistake. I was. Every breath I've taken since I walked away has reminded me of that. I loved you, but I didn't have the courage to fight for you. I let my own ignorance, my own fear, destroy everything beautiful I had. And now I'm begging not for a redo, not for a fairy tale. I'm begging for a chance to make it right. For them, for you, for the man I should have been from the beginning. Zariah stared down at him, her hands trembling now, not from weakness, but from the surge of everything she'd buried for years, rising to the surface all at once. You want to make it right, she whispered, her voice now filled with exhaustion, fury, love, and heartbreak all woven into one. Then show up, not just in words, not just in tears, in actions, in consistency, in truth. You don't get to fall apart in front of me and call it redemption. You rise, you prove, you earn it. He nodded desperately, still on the floor, still in the posture of a man who had everything and realized too late what truly mattered. I will, he said, choking on the words. Whatever it takes, I will. Zariah turned again, this time slower, her back straight, but her eyes full. She'd said her truth, released it like fire from her chest. For the first time, she felt lighter. Not because she trusted him again, but because she'd finally spoken the pain that once silenced her. And as she walked away, heels echoing down the hallway like a war drum, Ethan remained kneeling in the quiet she left behind, staring at the space where love used to live, praying that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to rebuild what his own hands had shattered. The days that followed were quieter, yet heavy, like the sky just before rain. Ethan didn't show up with roses or grand gesture-ish, showed up with silence, consistency, and an apology in every glance. He kept his distance respectfully, but never stopped trying. He sent letters, not corporate emails, but handwritten pages filled with vulnerable honesty. No titles, no excuses, just Ethan. And Zariah read each one alone, late at night, the moonlight resting on her windowsill as her fingers lingered over every word. Words that once would have made her crumble now made her pause. She didn't trust easily anymore. Trust was no longer a feeling, it was a test measured by action over time. But she saw the change, subtle, but real. So one cloudy Saturday afternoon, when the city felt paused in thought, she agreed to meet him again, this time alone. No children, no stage, just two people seated across from each other at a quiet cafe tucked between old bookstores and cobblestone streets. No audience, just air, truth, and 1,000 unspoken things hanging between them. Ethan arrived early, nervously adjusting the sleeves of his sweater like a boy on his first day of school. When Zariah walked in, dressed in soft beige, her hair tied back, her eyes unreadable, he stood instinctively not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as someone finally understanding respect. She sat across from him, crossed her legs, and folded her hands in her lap. No fake smiles, no small talk, just a deep inhale and a quiet storm behind her voice. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after everything?" Ethan swallowed. "Because the silence screamed louder than anything I've ever heard. And your voice, your truth, it woke something in me that should have never slept." Zariah studied him. He didn't fidget like before. He didn't rush to explain. He let her take her time. After a moment, she leaned in slightly. "Will you love our children not just today or tomorrow, but when it's hard? When they cry for answers, when the world tells them they don't belong?" Ethan's eyes welled, but he didn't blink away the tears. "I will love them the way I should have from the start. Not as a fix for my guilt, but because they are mine. Because I see them, and I will never let them feel invisible the way I made you feel." Her gaze tightened. "Will you protect them, even when people whisper about their skin, about where they come from? Will you fight for them not just in courts or schools, but in your heart, in your home?" Ethan leaned forward, hands trembling but open. "I won't just fight for them, Zariah. I will stand beside them. I will show up for every concert, every science fair, every nightmare and scraped knee. I will be the man they deserve, not because it's convenient, but because it's right." Zariah looked out the window for a long moment, watching the city move around them, hearing echoes of all the nights she once wept alone. She thought about the hospital room, the silence in the delivery ward, the first time she held her babies and whispered, "You don't need a father. I'll be enough." And she was. But maybe now, maybe she didn't have to be everything anymore. Slowly, she turned back to him. "They don't know you," she said quietly. "They know stories, but not the man. And I never told them you were a villain. I told them their father was somewhere, learning." Ethan lowered his head in gratitude, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I want to learn from them now. I want to grow with them." Another silence stretched, this one softer, warmer. Zariah leaned back, studying the man across from her. He still had money, power, influence. But all she saw now was a man stripped of ego, sitting in front of her with nothing but open hands. Finally, with a voice as gentle as a sunrise and as powerful as thunder, she whispered, "I want our children to know their father." Ethan looked up slowly, eyes wide, lips parting. "You do?" She nodded. "But not just the man who gave them blood, the one who shows up every day, who earns their love, not expects it." He placed his hand over his chest, where his heart pounded in disbelief. "Then I'll start there, and I'll never stop." She exhaled deeply, and for the first time in years, her breath didn't carry pain. It carried possibility, not trust, not yet, but something better than revenge or restoration. And as they both sat in the stillness, the world outside didn't know that in that tiny cafe, something was being rebuilt. Not a relationship, not a romance, but the bridge between a man and his children, forged through truth, tears, and time. Forgiveness wasn't a lightning bolt that struck Zariah's heart. It was a quiet, deliberate choice she made every morning. She looked into her children's faces and saw not just Ethan's eyes, but her own strength reflected back. She didn't forge Etho, could she? The scars of abandonment didn't vanish, but they stopped bleeding. They became part of her story, etched deep, but no longer defining her. Forgiveness was for her children, so they would grow up free from bitterness. But it was also for herself, so she could breathe again without pain riding on every exhale. It wasn't easy. It came in pieces, in hesitant conversations, in cautious co-parenting, in watching Ethan learn how to be present without being perfect. He divorced Clara months after their meeting in the cafe, not because Zariah asked him to, but because he realized that living a lie was no longer acceptable. He didn't chase after sympathy or applause, he chased after time. Time with his children, time to rebuild trust, time to become a man his family could rely on. Slowly, piece by piece, he began showing up not as the CEO in a tailored suit, but as the dad who learned how to braid his daughter's hair, who never missed a soccer game, who sat at kitchen tables solving math homework he barely remembered. Zariah watched from a distance at first, protective and guarded, but something in her heart softened with every genuine effort, every unspoken apology carried through action. He didn't try to buy her forgiveness. He earned it through presence, through patience, through humility, and over time, something they thought had died began to quietly bloom again. They began meeting not just to exchange the kids, but to share stories, coffee, and once in a while, laughter that didn't feel foreign anymore. Ethan respected her boundaries, celebrated her wins, and supported her empire like a man who knew he had once walked away from gold and never again wanted to make the same mistake. He even joined her company as an investor, silent, respectful, proud. And Zariah, though hesitant, allowed him space not into her heart at first, but into their world. The kids adored him. They clung to him, challenged him, asked him hard questions, and he answered each one with honesty and love. And one evening, after a long family day filled with music, board games, and the kind of joy that once seemed impossible, the triplets fell asleep on the couch, sprawled across his lap, one nestled beside her, and the third curled up between them like a quiet bridge. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of fairy lights along the mantel. The world outside was still, but inside, everything was alive, gentle, warm, whole. Ethan looked over at Zariah, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. He didn't speak at first, didn't need to. He simply reached for her hand. She let him. Slowly, cautiously, but she let him. And when his lips touched the back of her hand, it wasn't fiery or desperate, was tender, reverent, a kiss not of passion, but of promise. Zariah leaned into him, resting her head gently on his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. This time she said, not as a plea, but as a boundary lined with hope, "Don't let me go." Ethan turned toward her, his eyes moist but certain, his hand tightening around hers like an anchor. "Never again," he replied, his voice steady. And in that moment, they weren't two people rewriting the past. They were two souls writing something new, not perfect, not forgotten, but beautifully, bravely rebuilt.